All right, Doreen. So, I heard you speak on, you were interviewed on Dennis Durand's podcast, Soft as Steel, and it was earlier this year. And I heard you, and when you said something about building consensus, that's when I was like, that's a topic that is something that would be great for this podcast. And then life happened, we got busy, and then we ran into each other in Houston a few weeks ago, and you're like, hey, feeling like now's a really good time for this conversation. And I'm thinking, man, as you're hearing all the political ads and everything else going on in the world right now, I'm like, you're right, let's get this back on the calendar. So I'm super excited that we're doing this today. But before we do, let's dive into you and let the listeners know a little bit about you. So you've been in the industry for a long time. You have a lot of experience.
Yeah,
Give the listeners an idea of the size of teams and projects that you have managed.
I have managed projects going from like $1 million to $1.4 billion.
Holy crap.
My teams went from like just me and one inspector or something to I had a team of 60 people on a project. And then I also started running, I was like a portfolio manager when I worked for Jacobs. And so I had many projects and that was many millions of dollars of work. And I had people on all those projects. And that was like a staff of about 30, but there was a lot of people out on each project. So I can't even count how many people I've been sort of overseeing. Excuse my cough. So, so
That's
yeah, 1.4 billion was the largest project.
That's huge. I can't even imagine. And here I've thought that my $150 million was big, but billion I can't even fathom. So, but when you have that big of a project,
Mhm.
and that many team members, consensus is big.
Correct.
But I'm curious now, when you think about all those projects, do you have a favorite?
That $1.4 billion project is my favorite. So
Why?
um, it was new technology. It was the Catskill Delaware UV disinfection water treatment plant in New York City. I've worked in New York City most of my career and worked on water and sewer infrastructure. That's why they get big. They get their big projects. But that project, we did partnering. It was a great project to be on. It was like a 4 or 5 year project. Um, I love the team. It was a very diverse team, and it was a very successful project. So that was my favorite project.
When was that?
That was 2005.
So almost 20 years ago. How
Yeah,
many of those people do you
2000,
stay? How
2000.
many of those people do you stay in somewhat constant contact with?
Quite a few. Quite a few. I actually, when I left that project and worked for other projects, came back. When I worked for Jacobs, I came back and worked with several of the people I worked with on that project. So, and now actually in my new position at Brown and Colwell, I'm back with one of those women and we've stayed in contact and we've worked together many times over.
Yeah.
So it's been awesome.
One of my favorite teams I ever worked with, we worked together 12 years ago, and then I moved from Houston back to Kansas City. And so I wasn't around them a lot, but have stayed in contact, a constant contact with a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
But a few of them just kind of follow on Facebook and LinkedIn here and
Right.
there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in Houston a few weeks ago, I reached out ahead of time and said, who wants to meet for lunch? And it was like getting back together like we'd
Uh,
seen each other on a regular basis. I mean,
mhm.
that's what a really good team feels like, right?
Right.
It just clicks, it just gets right back to where it was. And it was just, you could just immediately feel the dynamic go back to the job site trailer that it was 12 years ago. We've all just gotten a little older, maybe a little grayer.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's such a great experience when you have a team that just really, really meshes and you keep those connections.
Yes, and you become friends, even with the contractors, where you would think there'd be a a not so great dynamic. I'm still very much. I'll see some of those people again and again. It's a small world, um, but
It is.
we can always go back to that project. Actually, on a recent project I was on, I met up with the contractor who was, he's now project director. He's moved up, and we were at a partnering session. And the two of us walked in and we're like, hey, how are you? So, and we were good catalysts for that partnering meeting because we've been through it before and we've been
Yeah.
done together. So that was awesome. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I like that you bring up partnering meetings because I think partnering meetings are so much rooted in gaining consensus. And right now, in your role as a third party consultant, that is your primary goal. You now take individual teams and help them work together toward a common goal. So
Correct.
let's start with how would you define building consensus? Well, let's just how would you define consensus and how is it different than compromise?
Um, Actually, it's really different than compromise if you think about it. A consensus is when you have like a meeting of the minds, like everybody can walk away and say, yes, I agree with that solution, or I agree with that move, or I agree with the opinion. Um, it it doesn't mean that you given up everything or given up anything. It means you've kind of you're going with all the other folks in a direction together with a mutual agreement. That's where you're going. A compromise means, okay, I'm going to give up this, but you walk away with it, like feeling like you've given something up, right? Oh, I had to
Yeah.
compromise. More of a negative. It's more negative than it is positive, right? And then you may bring that issue back again because you had to compromise. So you like, so now somebody has leverage, or you think you have leverage. I gave them this, so now I still have this, and now you owe me this. That's not consensus. Compromise is just very different than a consensus.
The way you're defining it, it makes me think that compromise we would define more as like a bartering agreement, right?
Correct.
You give up
Yeah.
this, I'll give up this. You give up
Right.
this, I give up this. But when
Right.
it comes to consensus, it's more about, in my opinion, hearing everybody out and then figuring out what is the best way forward for everyone. It's not like I'm giving something up or I need it to be this way, but it's
Right.
like, okay, wait, I just heard how this really affects you in this manner. And for the best of the project, if I do this, it works for me and for you. How about, it's not a bartering, it's instead a how can we work best together, not what can I get versus what can you get.
Exactly. Um, if there's an issue on the table, whether it's a technical issue or just a personality issue or whatever it is, looking at a technical issue, some, like, say the designer might say, I want it done this way because this is the way it was designed, but the contractor can come back and say, but it can get done better, faster this way. And when they talk about it and they look at it and they agree, and then the designer agrees with the contractor, and maybe there's some kind of a different solution that comes out of that, then we can move forward, and that's consensus. That's not like the designer say, go ahead, do it your way. That could be very different, right? So
Yeah.
yes.
So what do you think makes building consensus so important today? Because, partnering sessions have been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're becoming more and more the norm, and people are really seeing their usefulness. But it just feels like this conversation about consensus is so timely now. Why do you think that?
Um, well, I hate to blame it on our politics, but we are kind of in a polarized world. And I think our social media or all the other things that are impacting how we think or how we see ourselves are, polarizing people. Um, I I have owned Teslas, and I live on Long Island, and I know for a fact when I go out and drive my Tesla down the highway, some pickup truck is going to come up and tailgate me. You know what I mean? Like get right up behind me and be really annoying, and so I I almost know that that person is politically different than me, you know, because they're just showing off their truck behind my Tesla, right? He's a gas powered guy, even though I have a truck at home. I have a pickup truck also. Besides my Tesla. Well, I sold the Tesla and I have a different truck now. But anyway, but it's kind of weird. Like, oh, they're hanging out an American flag. That means they're more Republican than we are, or, so there's a very polarizing world out there. And unfortunately, I think some of that comes to the job, um, or to the boardroom or to wherever. So you're bringing that with you. Unfortunately, you're making that part of your identity. And I think that's happening a lot more now. It's hard to leave that aside.
It is. It really is. And
Yeah.
it takes it from TV and social media into
Mhm.
our boardrooms, into our conference rooms, and into our churches, our homes. Like it just takes it everywhere. So
Yes.
I agree with you. I think it's really important today because of those factors.
Mhm.
So tell me, what do you think, before we get into how to really, the things that help build consensus, let's
Mhm.
talk about the things that put roadblocks up from building consensus. When you're sitting in that partnering meeting, when you're sitting in that huddle, standing in that huddle on the job site, what are the things that create roadblocks that people do and or say that keep us from getting to a consensus?
Um, well, the first roadblock is personality. If, or, you know, somebody could have had a bad day that day and they're bringing that to work with them, right? So what is my, where's that person feeling that day? Where are they at in their life? That could be a roadblock. So they may not want to listen to anybody. They may not be ready to listen to anyone. Um, so personalities, that gets into it. So the other roadblock could be motivations. Um, and we were talking about this before we began taping a little bit. Um, you can come into a meeting and you have, like you said, I'm a third party. So you have a designer at the meeting, you have a contractor at a meeting, you also have the owner at a meeting. And each one of those people have a different motivation and a different job to do, right? So you have a contractor who is, for the most part, lump sum contractor, right? And they want to get things done quick and they have a margin to meet and they want to get done fast and get out of there and make their money. You have an owner who just doesn't want any bad press. They want a job built the way it was designed. Then you have a designer who, besides wanting it built as designed, they want to protect their design. They haven't made a mistake, or we don't make mistakes, or there's no, that they can come in and they can be very protective of their design. And then actually the CM is just trying to get the next job, right? We want to do a good job on this job so we can get the next job. As a consultant, we want to, please the owner. That's our main motivation, is to do what the owner is looking for. So that's differing motivations, and that can happen anywhere, right? And you can have different motivations for different reasons. So whether it's out in the field, whether it's in the meeting room, or just a phone call, there's different motivations. So it's kind of, that can make a roadblock for sure.
Yeah, so you said personality, emotional state, motivation, and agendas. And
Mm-hmm.
I teach a training called effective communication. And for effective communication in general, I find that there are 13 major roadblocks to effective communication, and all three of these are on that list.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about how to recognize it, how to prepare for it, and how to deal with it. And
Awesome.
take personality, for example, or emotional state. It's sometimes we ourselves, especially our society today, we are so want an answer right now. That instant gratification, we're so used to, oh, where's the latest blah, blah, blah. We look it up on the phone and we have the answer that we need, right? Like
Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
we get information so quickly that as soon as something pops into my head, and I'm so guilty of this, I will just text somebody. I'm like, hey, do you know this? And then they may think I need an answer right now. And I'm like, no, this is just my brain thinking. You can get back to me in 3 days, but a text doesn't deliver that message, right?
Right.
And there is this sense of urgency for us to give answers or to get answers.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't always stop and think or take the time to realize this person is not in the frame of mind that is going to make this the most productive conversation. we're
Right.
probably not going to get to a consensus at here. And we feel like we need that answer right now. And sometimes we do, but the
Hmm.
reality is so much of the time we could postpone it to later in the afternoon or tomorrow or even next week because it's going to be a better outcome.
Right.
You go through that conversation today with an emotional state of one or two people in that room that is not productive. You've just created an extra week of work trying to unravel what happened in
Right.
that conversation.
Exactly.
And and sometimes that emotional state is simply because they're coming in with a preconceived notion of what you want from them or how you
Right.
want them to do something different or for them to do something to change
Hmm.
the way they're doing it. Do you have
I
do you
agree.
have recommendations on when you walk into a space or you sit down at a boardroom and you can feel that, how
Mhm.
to mitigate that?
Um, well, if you're So I'll speak for myself a little bit. And actually that's one of the roadblocks too. You talked about texting and things. So we're one of the other roadblocks is we're not really communicating the best way when we're texting or, I know you and I are on Zoom, that's better, but we can see each other, we can see each other's body language. But technology has actually gotten in the way of communication in some ways, if you think about it. But okay, so when you walk into that room or you walk onto that Zoom meeting, um, um, myself as like a chair or as the construction manager, I would go in with several outcomes. First of all, everybody needs an agenda for their meeting, right? But it's not just the agenda. It's like what solutions do I want when I come out, and be ready for change, right? So I may have an idea of which way this is going to go, and I may try to steer it that way because I think it's best, but I need to be open for change. So um, so you have to have an agenda. You have to know what you want out of that agenda. What are the solutions you're looking for? But you also have to be open to another solution. There could be another option that comes your way, and you cross out what you thought was going to happen, and you put in, and that's the thing that everybody drew consensus on. But you should go in because some people have no idea where you're trying to go. So you should have some idea where you want people to go.
Yeah.
What's the solution to this problem? Okay, here's my idea. What are your ideas? So you definitely always need to go in a room with your ideas. And also you got to remember to leave your personality and your other stuff behind. You are going to be you. If you get a little frustrated, that's okay, but check yourself. This is not personal. This has to do with a project or a proposal. This has nothing to do with me personally. So,
That's a big lesson I learned in the industry in general is remembering that this is business, it's not personal.
correct.
Sometimes it becomes personal, which is unfortunate,
Mm-hmm.
but it's business. It's what's in the best interest of that project, that team, that organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it should not turn personal.
Right.
When you're talking about, here's what you want to get out of the meeting and what are their thoughts on it. One of the things that I would recommend is I like when everyone gets a chance at the beginning to say what they're hoping, what they want out of that meeting. Because
Yes.
let's say you've got 5, 10 people in the meeting and they all came in with a little different idea of even if they've seen an agenda, they may still come in with a different idea of what they're hoping to get out of it or what it was meant to do. If you
Right.
can go around the room and figure out, okay, what is each person hoping to get out of this meeting? You can also kind of start to gauge the demeanor of people that sometimes it's hard to gauge. They're just sitting there, they're not talking, you're not
Right.
sure what they're feeling. But when you ask them what they're wanting to get out of it, you can tell, I don't care what we get out of it. Okay, that person's not even bought into why we're here yet. You can start to understand where their
Exactly.
emotional state is with regards to it.
And that's an important part of the meeting also. If you're leading a meeting or if you're chair of a meeting or I think that's excellent. You go around the room, but even as people are speaking, you become more of an observer than a manager, right? Really need to listen because you will hear those motivations, or you will hear they had a bad day, or you will hear, um, you know, I've always used a sense of humor too. Like, oh, I can turn something into a joke, make somebody laugh if they come in
Yeah.
so serious. like, okay, stop being so serious, so and so, this is just right, you know, nobody's going to die, nobody's leaving with blood on their hands, that kind of thing. So it's yes, so knowing what you want out of the meeting, but also being ready to listen for sure, and hearing where everybody is at. And I think on that podcast that you heard, I had told Dennis that that was my superpower. Um, was was if I was ever to define a superpower for me, it was I was able to sit, listen, and understand what people's motivations were, so I could steer people into consensus. Not always possible. I mean, I'm not always successful, but um, I learned somehow along the years of trial and error that I needed to listen, and I needed to come in with a solution, and I needed to hear what their solutions were, and I needed to be ready to make change, and I needed to be ready to meet them right where they are, not where I was. Where are they? So
Well, and I think there are probably some people that are born that way who they're always just listening and observing and trying to put the pieces together. I think there are people like me, and it sounds like you, that developed this skill set.
you're right.
And I know for me, as a woman in construction, it was a skill set I had to learn to develop.
Mm-hmm.
When you look like me, when you're the size of me and you're trying to be well, you are being the lead on $100 million project as a superintendent,
Yeah.
I had to approach it differently than a 6'2" guy with a beard and a beer belly and a plaid shirt, right? Like I had to figure out how to do it a little differently, and that became my superpower too. One of mine is just listening to, okay, where are they trying? What are they trying to get at? But I think there's a lot of people who it's not their superpower. It's not a strength they have at all. They don't know how to do it. They haven't developed it yet.
Mm-hmm.
What what suggestions would you have for those people who, I mean, we all know a few, right? Who they struggle to even put themselves in someone else's shoes, but they have a desire to, they just don't know how to do it yet. What suggestions would you have for them?
um Practice. I guess I have to agree with you. Yes, I, I used to be a shy person. I used to observe a lot. So I'm just going to go back to what you said, and then I'll go back to what can people do. Um, because I did try in meetings to be like the guy who was 6 foot, whatever, right? And I kind of
At
got,
least you're tall.
yes, I was. Yes, I am tall. Um, so I did have some advantages, but when I tried to be like the guys, and I'm putting quotes up there for anybody who's just listening, uh, when I tried to be like the guys, actually, seriously, one time I got kicked under the table by another guy that I was being too tough or whatever. So I had to adjust, right? I'm sitting there going, okay, that's not working. So I became more my authentic, observing self, and then said, oh,
Mm.
yeah, right. Um, so yeah, I think it's a matter of practice. If somebody really wants to do that, I mean, practice in small ways. You and I are both leading big projects. Under 10 million that's a pretty big project as a superintendent. That's you got to really get consensus to keep people moving along, I'm sure. And a $1.4 billion project, yes, that had to keep moving as well. So we learned, and that's great because those jobs are done. So that's cool.
Yeah. I
Um, I
Oh,
would
go
say
ahead.
I would just say practice at home, or just think about, sit down with your partner or kids, or maybe there's a small team you're working with at work, and just kind of go in with your solution and learn to just listen and see what happens.
Well, and a suggestion I have for learning to listen is we are, I'm going to relate it to remembering names. Okay. So many
Oh,
people say, "Oh, I never remember names." Okay. Well, it is because so often when we introduce ourselves to someone, we're already thinking about what we're going to say next instead of absorbing what their name is.
right.
And I went to a class one time where I walk in and the instructor is at the door. He greets you at the door. And then we had 3 days of class. And I mean, from the time class started, he was calling us by our names, and we didn't have name cards or anything. And the very last day, I said, I have a question. I want to know how you knew all of our names. And he said, the key is taking the time to listen and repeat their name. And
Oh.
since I've started doing that, it has been game changing because I'm like, oh, Doreen, it's nice to meet you. After you say, I'm Doreen, Doreen, it's nice to meet you. And then it's like I had to stop and think, I had to listen, and then I repeated it.
Hmm.
And does it work 100% of the time? Nope, sure wish it did. Um, but it helps. And I think that's what we do too much in all of these meetings is we're so focused on what we want to say next, what
Right.
our rebuttal is, what we want to make sure someone gets heard or hears from us, that we're not listening to what they're saying. And so my suggestion for that is you've got to have a piece of paper or your phone or
Hmm.
something that as soon as you have an idea, you write it down so that
Yeah.
you already know, I'm not going to forget that I want to say this point. It's written here, but now that it's written down, I can listen to what they really have to say. And even during this interview, you can see occasionally I'll look over to the side because I haven't. Yeah, you have your pen. I'm like, oh, wait, she said this. I want to circle
Mhm.
back to this. But
Right.
if I just keep thinking about, oh, wait, I want to say that, missing what you're saying.
Hmm.
And if you're not really hearing what the people in the room are saying, you're not going to reach that consensus.
Yes. And that's a really good point. And that is a great behavior to somebody gave me that advice years ago as well. And I bring in to every conversation a pen, a paper, because if there's something I've thought of, but I want to keep listening to you, I just kind of make a note so I can get back to it. And I go back to my notes later and go, oh, I did want to talk to you about that. So
Yeah.
I have the word technology here from before. I wrote that down when you were talking about technology, and I said I wanted to mention that as a roadblock. So yeah, so I love that. I love that.
Well, and I've also, when we were doing lean training, I think they were calling it the parking lot. And so I'll still use that when I'm leading meetings or teams, and I will have a board
Right.
off to the side that's parking lot. So when someone
Mhm.
brings something up that's, okay, this is not on topic right now, because I think that's something that keeps us from reaching consensus
Mhm.
as well as all of a sudden, whoop, the conversation just veered off into another direction. Great topic, not what we're talking about right now. Let's put it on the board so that the person who said it realizes we do agree that it's important to talk about. It's just not right now the time.
Right.
And that can then help that person. That's a way you can help someone else with their listening skills is saying, hey, I hear you. We will come back to this.
Right.
But let's focus on this right now.
That's also very good to do with issues you can't resolve. So if something starts to take over the
Mm,
meeting, you can't resolve it. You kind of say, let's revisit this later, and like putting the parking lot.
yeah.
Um, yeah, new things that come to the meeting, let's put them in the parking lot. Things we can't resolve, let's go. Everybody go to their corners and come back again. Things like that. That kind of helps keep things moving and keep everybody calm and moving on. So. Mhm.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about what steps. What steps do you think are important to help people achieve consensus in any room, any conversation?
Um, well, we've mentioned a few of them, so maybe it's just summarizing. Actually,
Yep.
go in, know the agenda, know what you're, you know, come in prepared to any room. Progress meetings, whatever they are, you always get meeting minutes from the last time. You always get, what's the latest log? Where are we? Where are we at? All those things. So know what issues you want to talk about and know what it is that's going to be brought up. So be prepared. That's the first one. Then be prepared. Have your ideas ready of, if there are issues listed on that agenda, I have ideas for this, have that ready too. Then listen, share your ideas when appropriate, and actually listen to everyone else's ideas. You'll never know when something better comes along. And that's so important. That's what's so important about diversity and innovation. They talk about all that. There's not one solution to every problem, but there is a solution to every problem. There isn't just one, though. There
That's
are
right.
several, right? So, and if you go in with that mantra, there's a solution to every problem. It may not be mine, but it could be. There is a solution. And the best solution is one that everybody agrees to. And moving forward. And obviously, if it's right, we're in the engineering world, it's got to be you know, according to standards and all this other good stuff. But everybody needs to agree to it, and it needs to be, legal, structurally sound, all that kind of stuff. And then, and get to know the people you're meeting. Uh, have team building. Even just having coffee with some people sometimes. It's not coercing them, taking them out golfing so you can talk them into something. It's not that. It's getting to know each other as people, so that when you walk in, you know who you are as people. I think that's so important, so that you can kind of then say, when they get a little aggravated about something, you kind of know them as a person, and you don't take it personally, right? Um, for some reason, I'm just thinking about, I had taken over a project, and I was kind of new to the project, but I was in a supervisory position. Went to a meeting, and this one of these contractors got up and started just cursing, you know, not at me, but just cursing out of and I kind of, I calmed the meeting down a little bit. I'm like, listen, his name was Steve, and I said, listen, Steve, you know, if there really is an issue, let's talk about it, right? And then he walked out, and then he came back, and he like apologized to me. He goes, oh, I'm so sorry. That'll never happen again. That was, so it was just a matter of like, listen, if something's upsetting you, we can talk about it some more, and then he never did it again. So he calmed down. So from
Yeah.
then on, right? So he got to know me a little bit better, and I got to know him a little bit better. So,
So I'm hearing four big steps.
mm-hmm.
One, arrive prepared.
Yes,
Two, come with ideas,
yes,
ideas and solutions.
mm-hmm.
Three, come with the intent to learn new ideas and
Correct,
solutions that aren't
right,
yours,
mm-hmm.
and get to know the people,
Mm-hmm.
get to know them, create a mutually respectful relationship
Right,
where you genuinely care about the outcome for each person on the team.
yes, yes, because there is the bigger picture is a successful project, or a successful board meeting, or you want to come out, and it's okay not to solve everything there. You can solve it later, but it's better to come out with consensus on the things that you solved than to come out mad about and not have something solved, right? It's
Yeah.
better. Yeah, you can agree to disagree, we'll talk about it later, that kind of thing. And then you can walk out and go have beers together, or whatever you want to do together. You can go out, you can go play, you can kind of put the meeting aside and go do your thing, right? Or go
Yeah.
do the work you got to do on a day-to-day basis. I find that so important. Not everybody's going to like everybody else, but it's just getting to know who those people are and what makes
Yeah.
them tick. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's important.
Okay. Anything else on consensus, building consensus before I ask you my final question?
uh I can't think of anything right now.
Okay. So, final question, Doreen Bartoldus. Um, what is one constructive behavior that you would recommend to the listeners that will help them with their careers or in their companies?
Wow. I think it's to remember, and this probably veers off consensus a little bit, but getting to know people and understanding where you're at, I think, is the best thing to do. Like, it's not about keeping your head down and doing the work every day. It's also getting to know the people around you, and walk out. Like, I always walked out on the job site, even though I didn't have to. It wasn't my job to, but I would walk out on the job site, say hello to the guys, and some of them would started to recognize me time after time. It's understanding the big picture and getting to know the people that you're there with. I mean, what good is a day at work if it can't be joyful in some way or other?
Yeah.
And so have coffee with somebody, go out and take a walk, say hello to the people on the job site, or the job site people have, a lot of the contractors will have barbecues and everybody gets together. I think that's perfect. Um, so I think it's a matter of, and that helps your career too. Little networking, you hear more about, other jobs or other solutions or other openings. That kind of networking helps too. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a very constructive behavior, is to have joy at your job.